In this lesson, we're going to read a news article together so you can improve all areas of your English. You'll expand your vocabulary, learn advanced grammar, and improve your pronunciation at the same time. And this article discusses a current event, a phone meeting between Trump and Putin to discuss a peace deal. Welcome back to JForrest English. Of course, I'm Jennifer. Now let's get started. Our headline, Trump's call with Putin exposes shifting ground on Ukraine peace talks. First, let's discuss this word. What part of speech is this? I'm sure you know the verb to call. You call someone. Trump called Putin. That would be the verb conjugated in the past simple. But here it's a noun. Both of these are the noun and the subject of the sentence, Trump's call. So a phone call. I received a call from my sister or the bank or my boss. So a call is the noun. You can use the verb receive, which sounds formal, or you can use a more everyday, natural alternative, get, and then both of them are conjugated in the past simple. Now, like our headline, you can use a possessive, my call, and then the preposition with someone. So the bank, yes, the bank is a building, but when I say the bank, I mean a manager who works at the bank or a person who works at the bank. My call with the bank went well. Now, I could say my call to the bank, but that sounds like more just one direction. With sounds more conversational. So let's review our headline again. Trump's call with Putin, so their conversation exposes, because all of this is conjugated as it. So that's why our verb is in the present simple conjugated with third person singular. It exposes, which is another way of saying reveal, made information available or public. So exposes, reveals, shifting ground. Let's review this shifting ground. Shifting ground on something means whatever that something is, in this case, the Ukrainian peace talks, that situation is changing, uncertain, or unstable. So it sounds like they talked, and from that, information became available that peace talks, they're changing, they're unstable or uncertain. Don't worry about taking these notes. I summarize everything in a free lesson PDF. You can find the link in the description. Now let's continue with the article. Last year, Donald Trump promised he would end the war in Ukraine in 24 hours. Let's look at the sentence structure using promise. So of course, if you promise to do something, you make a commitment. Now, you can use the structure promise to do something. So that would be the infinitive. So you could say last year, Donald Trump promised to end the war. So that this is the verb end. So you can put this in the infinitive directly after promise, and you would conjugate promise. So we have last year, which tells me promise needs to be in the past simple. So that's one structure you can use when the subject and the person doing the promise are the same. Another structure you can use, which we have here, is promise, and then the subject, it can be the same as the other subject here, or it can be a different subject as well. And then you use would in the past, will for the present or future, and then your base verb, because will, would are modals. Here's an example. Notice the subject that promise belongs to is different from the subject after promise. I promise someone else. I promise you will, as our contraction. I promise you'll love this lesson. And of course, the base verb. So I'm saying that this is guaranteed. This is certain. And what is certain? The fact that you'll love the lesson. I promise you'll love the lesson. So make sure you watch it until the end. So if you also think this is true, that you'll love this lesson, maybe you already do, put yes, 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 put yes, 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 Jennifer, put yes, yes, yes in the comments. So now you have two different ways to use the verb promise. Last year, Donald Trump promised he would end, because this is in the past. He would end the war in Ukraine in 24 hours. Now, these quotes are around 24 hours because they're letting us know that this is directly what Donald Trump said, whereas the other words are not what he directly said. Let's continue. Last week, he said, so he being Donald Trump, he said that it would not be resolved until he and Russian President Vladimir Putin could get together and hash it out in person. So first of all, this "it" represents the war. So he said that the war would not be resolved until he and Russian President Vladimir Putin could get together. So if two people get together, it means that they meet. It can be for a social purpose or it can be for a business purpose. It's very common for a native speaker to text someone socially, whether it's a friend or a family member, and say, "We need to get together soon." So the person will reply back and say, "Absolutely. When are you free? When are you available?" So this is how you would suggest arranging plans. Now, in a business context, you could say, "Last week, all the managers got together." So your verb is get. That's what you conjugate. This is the past simple. Got together to do something. So to discuss the budget. So it sounds like they were all in the same room so they could meet, right? So you can use it socially or professionally. And again, these two words are in quotes because the article wants you to know that this is the language that Donald Trump used. So we could get together and hash it out in person. What does it mean to hash something out? Hash it out. If you hash something out, it means you discuss it thoroughly. And you do that to resolve it or to reach an agreement. So when these managers got together, maybe one of them said, "We need to hash out who's presenting." So we need to discuss it, but discuss it thoroughly with the goal of reaching an agreement. So by the end of the conversation, they will know who's presenting. So it's stronger than simply discuss. We need to hash out who's presenting. Let's continue. On Monday, the ground shifted again. So you already know what this means because we discussed it. Where did we discuss it? In the headline? It's shifting ground. Notice it's slightly different because here it exposes something. So shifting ground, this is the noun form. So here we have the ground shifted again. So this is the verb form. So notice here, the ground is the noun, it's the subject, and then the verb is to shift and is conjugated in the past simple to show this is a completed action. So it's like saying on Monday, this situation changed again. Are you enjoying this lesson? If you are, then I want to tell you about the Finally Fluent Academy. This is my premium training program where we study native English speakers from TV, movies, YouTube, and the news so you can improve your listening skills of fast English, expand your vocabulary with natural expressions, and learn advanced grammar easily. Plus, you'll have me as your personal coach. You can look in the description for the link to learn more, or you can go to my website and click on Finally Fluent Academy. Now let's continue with our lesson. After a 2-hour phone call with Putin, now notice here, 2 hour functions as an adjective, Without it, the sentence would be after a phone call with Putin. You don't have to say phone. You could just say after a call with Putin. Now, 2 hour tells you more about the call. It tells you the length, but adjectives do not have singular plural forms, which is why you don't see an S on hour, even though obviously it's more than one. After a 2-hour phone call with Putin, he said that the conditions of a peace deal could only be negotiated between Russia and Ukraine. Now, of course, remember, he represents Donald Trump. So Donald Trump is saying that it's up to Russia and Ukraine. Of course, the leaders of the country. Notice this structure of be negotiated. This is the passive form. Here's another example using the passive voice. The deal was negotiated. So you have your verb to be. Negotiated is always in the ed form. So you take your verb to be and that's what you conjugate. So here, this is in the past simple and is conjugated with the subject, which is singular. The deal was negotiated by the managers. Now, what would this be in the active voice? What's the subject? The managers, and then negotiated, because to negotiate is the active verb. In this case, we want it in the past simple. And then the subject of the passive becomes the object. The managers negotiated the deal. So he, Trump, said that the conditions of a peace deal, so the conditions represent the who, what, when, where, why, how, all those details. Those would be the conditions. Conditions of a peace deal could only be negotiated between Russia and Ukraine. Russia and Ukraine can negotiate the deal. So again, that would be the active form of the verb negotiate. And maybe with the help of the Pope. So remember, this is coming from the words of Trump. Trump is saying maybe. Maybe is if something is possible, but again, it's also not possible. So Trump is saying, well, maybe the Pope can help. Maybe he can't help. So it's unknown by adding maybe, and maybe with the help of the Pope. Let's continue. Still, the US president has not lost his sense of optimism about the prospect for peace. Still has different meanings, but in this case, it's an adverb to show a contrast. It's the same as saying despite that or nevertheless, because here he's excluding himself from the deal, from the negotiations, the peace negotiations. He sounds more uncertain, but now he's expressing some positivity. So there's that contrast that there. Still, the US president, of course, notice this use of the. You need the president, and then US functions as an adjective in this case. Now, there's only one president of a country, which is why it's unique. Same with Pope. That's why we have the Pope, because it's a unique position. There's only one. Still, the US president has not lost his sense of optimism. So optimism here, it represents being positive, being hopeful, a sense that good will come. So that is sense of optimism. You don't need to say sense of, you could just say has not lost his optimism. So saying sense of, that's optional. And it's his sense of optimism. So notice the optimism belongs to him. That's why we have this possessive. His sense of optimism about, so this is the preposition you need to connect it to the topic. What are you optimistic about? Oh, I'm optimistic about the war in Ukraine. So about the prospect for peace. This is what he's optimistic about the prospect for peace. Posting on social media that the two leaders, so remember, it's the US president posting on social media. Now he's talking about two leaders. He's a leader, but because he makes it sound like other people, we know that it's is Putin and Zelensky, that the two leaders would immediately start. So again, having these two words in quotes lets us know as the readers that these two words came directly from the president's mouth, from Trump's mouth. Would immediately start negotiations for a ceasefire and an end to the war. Now, immediately start, that's very strong language. If I hear that, I think is going to happen later today, tomorrow, the next day, certainly by the beginning of next week. It's in the extremely near future, right? So it's a very strong word choice, which is why they put it in quotes to let us know that this strong wording came from Trump's mouth. Now, interesting to notice that this word negotiations is a noun. Before we talked about it as a verb, both in the passive voice and the active voice. But here, because you start something. So you start negotiations, that's a something, but you can also start doing something. So you can would immediately start negotiating. So you could use the verb form. However, in this article, what I have highlighted is a noun. Now, if you use the verb negotiating, which is in the ing form because start plus ing, but to be fair, start is an optional gerund verb, so you could equally say start to negotiate. But notice you do not use the preposition for in the verb form. So you just negotiate something. So negotiating or to negotiate a ceasefire. So let's review that again. That the two leaders would immediately start negotiations for a ceasefire and an end to the war. That sentiment was somewhat at odds with the Russian view. Okay, so sentiment represents one's opinion, feeling, or attitude. So that sentiment, so what's the opinion or feeling? Well, it's Donald Trump's opinion that the two leaders would immediately start negotiations. That's his opinion. So that sentiment was somewhat at odds, with the Russian view. This is great to have in your vocabulary. It means that there's disagreement or conflict. Now, the full structure is to be at odds with someone or something. Now, by adding somewhat, it reduces it. Because if you say they were at odds with each other, it sounds like they were disagreeing with each other. But if you say they were somewhat at odds with each other, it means, well, they were somewhat not at odds. So there was part of them where there was disagreement, another part where there wasn't disagreement. So it reduces it by adding somewhat. So notice grammatically, you need that verb to be conjugated. So this is conjugated with the subject they, and in the past simple, they were at odds. It's always with an S, at odds with, and then you can say each other. So they were in disagreement with each other. They were in conflict. Now, you could also say something like their opinions were at odds. If you use their opinions as something, you don't need with each other. So it's just their opinions were at odds. So their opinions conflicted. They were not the same. We're at odds. So that's a great one to have in your vocabulary. That sentiment was somewhat at odds with the Russian view. Putin only said that his country is ready to work with Ukraine to craft a memorandum on a possible future peace agreement. So craft is another way of saying to create. And you may have seen this word before, a memorandum. It's a written document with a plan or a policy or a course of action, but think of it as a draft. So it's not a final agreement. It's a draft. So craft, create a memorandum on a possible future peace agreement. Well, this use of possible is also makes it sound that it isn't guaranteed or it isn't secure. So now you can understand why this is at odds, because Trump said they would immediately start negotiations. But then Putin says a possible future peace agreement. So those two statements, they do sound like they're somewhat at odds. Let's continue. Talks about memorandums and a possible future. So again, we have this possible future. And remember, I said that it's important that this word possible is there because it may or may not happen. So a possible future of peace hardly seems the kind of solid ground on which lasting deals can be quickly built. So this sentence simply means it doesn't sound like there's a strong commitment. So solid ground, that would be a strong commitment, a sure thing. And then a lasting deal is a deal that lasts. So a deal that's certain in the future. But there is a possibility, again, that word possibility, remember, it may or may not happen. But there is a possibility that Trump's latest take on the war in Ukraine could be a sign that the U.S. will ultimately abandon the negotiating table. So let's review this take. So Trump's latest take on the war. So one's take on something, that's the sentence structure. So one represents a possessive subject, which is why there's this possessive here, because it's one's take. So Trump's take, my take, our take on something. This is another way of saying your opinion, but it's more so how you interpret a situation. So your perspective, your viewpoint of a situation. So I could say, I thought the meeting went really well. This is how I interpreted the meeting. What's your take? Now, you only need the preposition on when the something is identified. But because here it's obvious we're talking about the meeting, it's not necessary for me to repeat it. If I did, I wouldn't say on the meeting. I would just change it to it. But again, that's not required. What's your take? What's your take on it? So I'm asking, how did you interpret the meeting? But there's a possibility that Trump's latest take on the war in Ukraine could be a sign that the U.S., so here remember, U.S. as a country requires an article. It's an exception. The U.S. will ultimately abandon the negotiating table. This is interesting because here, what do you notice about what I highlighted? This word, negotiating. Well, it's not a noun because table is a noun. It's not a verb because abandon is the verb in the future, simple, will abandon. So it's actually an adjective. So now you know the noun form, the verb form, and the adjective form. So what type of table? The negotiating table. This is like saying it's the table that people sit at to negotiate, the negotiating table. So if Trump abandons the negotiating table, it represents that he would permanently leave the table. So he would no longer be involved in the negotiations, the noun form, the negotiations. So you imagine there's a table, there's Trump, Putin, Zelensky, maybe other people, but then if he abandons it, he leaves it permanently. Let's continue. Later on Monday, Trump said he would not step away from brokering talks between the two countries. So having step away from something, but in the negative, sounds like he won't abandon. Because if you step away from something, you leave that something. Now, to be honest, to step away from does not sound as severe as abandon, because abandon you permanently leave. But if you step away, it does not mean permanent. Actually, this is very commonly used in an everyday context. I might say, oh, I need to step away for a few minutes. Can you watch my desk? So I need to leave my desk for a few minutes, maybe to make a phone call, to get lunch, whatever. So I'm stepping away, I'm leaving, but it's not permanent. So he would not step away from brokering talks. If he brokers talks, it means that he facilitates, helps make those talks happen. Brokering talks between the two countries, of course, Russia and Ukraine, but acknowledged that he had a red line in his head. Oh, well, what does this mean? He has a red line in his head? Do you know? Of course, it's a figurative meaning. Remember, this is figurative, and the red line represents the limit. And in his head, that doesn't have much of a meaning. It's not that the limit is in his head. It's just think of it as a personal limit. So he has a limit. So below the line, he's willing to do these certain things. But if there's something that's above the line, he will not do it. So the line is his limit. And again, because it's in quotes, it means that these words came directly from Trump. So all of this means that he will still be involved in the talks between Russia and Ukraine, but at a certain point in the future, he may not be involved because he has a limit of what he's willing to tolerate. Let's continue. Trump has expressed frustration with both Putin and Zelensky as efforts to resolve the 3-year-old conflict drag on. So again, this is an adjective, which is why there's no plural form. It describes the conflict. Well, what type of conflict? The 3-year-old conflict. And drag on, if something drags on, it means it's happening longer than wanted, needed, or expected. So if you say something like, oh, the end of that movie dragged on, it means the end of the movie was too long. It should have ended sooner. So drag is your verb, and then on is your preposition. So it's a phrasal verb. But in my sentence, it was the past simple. The end of the movie dragged on. Let's continue. Putting aside Monday's rhetoric, notice the pronunciation is very different from the spelling rhetoric, 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 rhetoric. Now, if you put something aside, it means that you don't include it. You ignore it. So you may hear this as, let's put aside our differences. So let's ignore our differences. Let's not include them in our discussion. Let's put aside our differences. Putting aside Monday's rhetoric is speech or words in spoken form or writing that's meant to convince or influence. So Monday's rhetoric, it appears that Ukraine and Russia are set to continue some kind of talks, and talking in any form is progress after nearly 3 years of war. So notice here, this has an S on it because it's the noun form. It's not an adjective. So in this case, 3-year-old conflict, it's the adjective. Adjectives don't have singular plural forms. Nouns do, and this is your noun, so that's why there's an S on it, as you would expect. And let's review set. Now notice it's to be set to do something. So you have to understand the grammar of whatever you're learning. So if you're set to do something, it means you're planned, or it is finalized, it's arranged. That's how it's used. For example, the team is set, because to be set, the team, that's a collective noun, so it is third person singular. The team is set, and then your infinitive, to launch the new product. So this sounds like it is finalized. You can think of it simply as the team is ready to launch, is prepared to launch, is expected to launch. So you can use it as something is finalized. And that's the end of the article. So what I'll do now is I'll read the article from start to finish, and you can focus on my pronunciation. Trump's call with Putin exposes shifting ground on Ukraine peace talks. Last year, Donald Trump promised he would end the war in Ukraine in 24 hours. Last week, he said that it would not be resolved until he and Russian President Vladimir Putin could get together and hash it out in person. On Monday, the ground shifted again. After a 2-hour phone call with Putin, he said that the conditions of a peace deal could only be negotiated between Russia and Ukraine, and maybe with the help of the Pope. Still, the US president has not lost his sense of optimism about the prospect for peace, posting on social media that the two leaders would immediately start negotiations for a ceasefire and an end to the war. That sentiment was somewhat at odds with the Russian view. Putin only said that his country is ready to work with Ukraine to craft a memorandum on a possible future peace agreement. Talks about memorandums and a possible future of peace hardly seems the kind of solid ground on which lasting deals can be quickly built. But there is a possibility that Trump's latest take on the war in Ukraine could be a sign that the US will ultimately abandon the negotiating table. Later on Monday, Trump said he would not step away from brokering talks between the two countries, but acknowledged that he had a red line in his head. Trump has expressed frustration with both Putin and Zelensky as efforts to resolve the 3-year-old conflict drag on. Putting aside Monday's rhetoric, it appears that Ukraine and Russia are set to continue some kind of talks, and talking in any form is progress after nearly 3 years of war.
Do you want to keep learning English with the news? If you do, put let's go in the comments. And of course, make sure you like this lesson, share it with your friends, and subscribe so you're notified every time I post a new lesson. And you can get this free speaking guide where I share 6 tips on how to speak English fluently and confidently. You can click here to download it or look for the link in the description. And here's another lesson I know you'll love. Watch it now.